So can someone tell me, can anyone tell me, what makes a king a king? If I was his crown, his parents. Sorry, what was that? I wasn't listening.
I said his crown.
His crown? Yes. Luck? No, not luck. King doesn't become king through luck.
His power.
His power, yes.
Being born into it.
In being born into it, yes, that's all part of it. Possible.
Conniving on occasions.
Yes, kings can be very conniving. There's regicide. They assert the authority of their siblings quite often. But a king also has dominion. They've got a kingdom. Without a kingdom, it would be a pretty funny king. It would be a king in exile. It would just be a king. But yeah, a king has a right to rule. And you know, in medieval times there was divine right, and that was basically a lot of the with Shakespearean plays. That was a theme that would pop up, and that's why when the king was killed by commoners or whatever, that there was, you know, flames in Vesuvius and, you know, the bubonic plague and all sorts of weird things happening, because that's what people believed back in the time of medieval times, during the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages were dark because they were very ignorant people, and they were made ignorant by the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is a very ignorant organisation, ignorant about many things. But I don't want to talk about the Catholic Church. But a king has word, it carries weight. So when a king speaks, a king decrees, and what a king says goes. So you don't live too long if a king tells you to do something and you go, no, I'm not going to do that. Of course, we live in a time now where we have kings and queens, but we don't really have an absolute monarchy. And what I mean by absolute monarchy is when a king or queen, they are the law, they are the courts, they are the parliament, they are basically the power of the land. And during the time of Israel that we read about in the Old Testament, the kings that were the kings of the earth back then were absolute monarchists. There wasn't anything constitutional about it. In fact, God told Samuel to go and speak to the people and say that they will take your sons and your daughters to be bakers, confectioners, etc., etc., etc. God warned the people of what a king would be like. A king has an ability to act, and armies obey. When a king gives an order to attack the enemy, whatever enemy it be, whether it be internal, whether it be external, the armies will obey and nations will tremble. When a king decrees war upon another kingdom and upon another entity, another race of people, the king's word declares war, and there's power. And you know, the earthly kings, they wield power through force. And that's what I was saying before. If you stood up against these people or against the laws they decree, and we can read through the Bible about the laws of certain kings, the laws of Darius, of the Medes and the Persians, which altereth not, and those divine, not divine in a way in that a king's word is divine, is that there is that ultimate power, and though that it may not be as what we would consider to be divine, there is that divine word that's spoken by the king, and we can read about it, how that you know, I think it's in the Proverbs, how that everything that goes well when there's no rising up against the king. We're also called in the New Testament to honor the king, to honor those that are above us, and we don't honor them as a deity or something, but in these societies, in these civilizations, a lot of these kings, particularly Pharaoh comes to mind, was revered as a god. And that was the whole point of the plagues of Egypt, actually, was Jehovah, the great I am, basically saying to Pharaoh, you are not the God that you think you are. You're not the God. And to the Egyptians, he is not the God. And there's a figure type of the devil there where the devil would put himself into the place of that kingship and to be the ruler of the earth. And we know that because that's what the devil tempted Jesus with, that I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world if you would just bow down and worship me. That's all the devil wanted, was power, and through that power, he found a weakness in man, because man also desires that power. And power is an amazing thing. I don't know who said this. It's probably some left-wing person out there, but all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's true. It's very true. But there was another king. There was a king that came to earth, and most people, they didn't recognize his authority. They didn't recognize him as a king, but he came to earth as a king. And as I said before, a king has an ability to speak, and what speaks happens. Well, this particular king spoke. He said to the storm, "Peace, be still." And what happened? It obeyed. He said to the demons, "Come out," and the demons fled. He said to those that had leprosy, "Be clean," and the leprosy departed. That was the power of this particular king. And we can even see Jesus, when he was on this earth, he said, we read between Matthew 5 and 7 that you have heard it said, but I say unto you. Because he came with power. His word was power. And what did he got begrudging respect from some of the lower ranking Pharisees when they said, "Never spoke a man like this." And that was the best that the Pharisees would recognize. So that this man, Jesus, who came to earth as a servant king, not to rule and reign, but to provide an example to mankind of how mankind should live. And a king, has a kingdom. Jesus has a kingdom, but the kingdom wasn't of this world. We read this. And Jesus said that the kingdom of God shall dwell within you. That was the kingdom. That's where Jesus rules. He rules in the hearts of men. And it's not, a king will rule through terror, a king will rule through power, an earthly king. They would rule through might, but not Jesus. Jesus ruled through love. And a king has subjects. It would be a pretty silly king that was only a king and there was no subject. Sort of reminds you of, there's an old cartoon, was it The Wizard of Id? And the people of the Wizard of Id, in the land of Id, I think they were called idiots from memory. And the funniest thing was that there was a person who actually used to look like the king at one of my workplaces. It was about yay tall, and was a woman too, which was even more funny. But a king without any subjects is no king, and that's why Jesus wasn't without subjects when he was on this earth. He said, "My sheep shall hear my voice." He said, "If you love me, keep my commandments." And that's a difference between the earthly king, where the earthly king will demand loyalty. They will demand that a person would submit themselves wholly unto them, which we do with Jesus, but not in a way that is you do it my way or I'll kill you sort of thing. Jesus the way of Jesus was that you have an opportunity to be in my kingdom. That is the servant king. And he didn't come to the world to judge it per se. The world was already judged. We can read about that in the scriptures. But it was to show people a better way, to show people the way of salvation. That this new king was going to be a king that was going to be a king for the people. And we hear ridiculous things. The English say all sorts of ridiculous things like a princess of the people. She was a princess of the people. What does that even mean? I mean, a king is a king of the people. Well, they're meant to be a king of their own people. And it's, I guess we see with, particularly the British monarchy, a sort of a dying and an ebbing away of an institution that's been there for a very long time. And it's sad to see. It's decaying and it's crumbling. But Jesus, he's not decaying. He doesn't fade away. He was on the earth 2,000 years ago, and he's very much alive today as he was 2,000 years ago. And these earthly kings, they'll build themselves treasure houses, they'll build themselves cities, they'll build themselves monuments. You can go to Egypt and see all the monuments of Egypt. Great Pharaoh. You can go and see the Aztecs and their rulers and the great things they've built for themselves. You can go and see Alexander the Great, who named himself after just about every city that he went into. That's why there's so many Alexanders in this world, because he was great. But they're the legacies of the world. The legacy of Jesus was to build a kingdom without walls, that all people would be gathered in to his kingdom. There will be a time when the door is shut and time is no more, but up until that particular point in time, Jesus is calling everyone into his kingdom, that whosoever will come. Now we can read in John chapter 8 in verse 48 about the Jews and what the Jews thought of Jesus. They said to Jesus, and remembering what I'm saying, that Jesus was the king, is the king. Then answered the Jews and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil? That's what... Could you imagine saying that to a king? We think you're a devil. You're a Samaritan. And by the way, Samaritans actually, for the Jews, was an offensive term. I probably couldn't get away with saying something equivalent here because I'd get cancelled. But it's basically an ethnic slur. And Jesus goes on to say that, you dishonor me. And they didn't listen to the words of Jesus. They didn't recognize the kingship that was in front of him. But they should have recognized the power and authority because of the miracles that he worked. As a king would declare words, so it became to pass. If we turn to Matthew chapter 2. We read here the Magi. So many people in the world make so much fuss about these three wise men. I don't even know if there were three of them. There may be more. There may be less. Don't know. But they did. These Magi that came to Jerusalem because they were. Came to Judea, to Herod, because they were aware of the prophecies that Jesus was to be born around this time. And we read in verse 1, Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. It's not the first time that Jerusalem's been troubled. Certainly won't be the last. But so these wise men of the East, who we don't read anything about them, and like I said, religion makes up a whole story about these Magi, and I don't really know where they came from. They may have came from Babylon, they may have came from India, they may have came from China. Who knows? We just know they were east of Mesopotamia, and but they realized that there was a king of the Jews was born, that the Messiah had come. They saw his star. The power was there, and yet the Jews, they weren't ready for Jesus. They were not ready, and that's why they were troubled. It's quite telling, isn't it, that the Gentiles would know and would be more aware of what was going on than what the Jews were. If we turn to John chapter 18, verse 36. I want us to have a real handle and understanding of the kingship that Jesus has. Because it's important that we understand that, as I said before, that Jesus rules in the hearts of men. He rules in our hearts. And as a king, we live our life accordingly as his subjects. Being a subject, when you're a subject, it's not maths or English or chemistry or physics, but a subject is you're subjected to whatever you're subjected to, which is one of those weird things with English. But we're subject to Christ, so therefore we're his subjects. Now that's a thought, isn't it? In verse 36, and Jesus answered, my kingdom, and this was to Pilate, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. The Jews rejected Christ, by and large. So when Jesus said that his kingdom was not from hence, the Jews had counted themselves unworthy to be at this particular point in time in the kingdom. And he makes a point. This world is not the kingdom of Jesus Christ. If this world was the kingdom of Jesus Christ in its sinful state, then he would have made a deal with the devil when he was tempted. But no, he had a higher calling. Jesus is unlike the kings of this world. He didn't seek power for himself. And speaking of power, let's turn to a couple of quick scriptures. John chapter 5, verse 8. I'm just going to read out single scriptures here out of the Bible, showing the power of Jesus Christ as the King, as his word declared, decreed, and so it was. John 5, verse 8. Jesus saith unto him, rise, take up thy bed and walk. I don't even need to continue. We all know what happened. Luke 18, verse 42. And Jesus said unto him, receive thy sight, thy faith has saved thee. Mark 4, verse 39. And Jesus arose and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. John 11. These are more and more and more miraculous as we're going along. The power of the King. John 11, verse 43. And when he thus had spoken, he, Jesus, cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. So here's the power of Jesus Christ. He said to the lame, rise up and walk. He said to the blind, receive your sight. He said to the winds, peace, be still. He said to the dead, come forth. This is the power of a miracle of Jesus Christ on earth. As the King of Kings, as the Lord of Lords, as having all his power and yet being the servant king while he was on there, serving the people. And we read more about this if we turn to Philippians chapter 2. And verse 5. Paul makes a point here. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Which was, in verse 6, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself, and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. So the King, when he came to the earth, he humbled himself. The mind of Jesus Christ. We have the same mind. That whatever we are, whatever state we are in this world, whether we were a natural king even, or whether we're a pauper, or all of us are in between, our mind is not a mind of exalted things. Our mind is not a things of look at me, look what I can do. I'm greater than all these people in this world. I mean, we might be, but that's not the point. Jesus was the greatest. He was greater than Muhammad Ali. He was greater than any man that had ever lived on the earth and that would ever live on the earth. And yet, he could have been on the earth as his own form, and how that would have looked, and that I don't know. I guess I will see when the Lord returns, because we will see the Lord return as the King, not as a servant, not as a servant king, but as the ruling king. But it wouldn't have been robbery. It's a nice turn of phrase. If he had to come to the earth as the Godhead, as not as the servant, that's what the Pharisees and Sadducees and lawyers and scribes were looking for. That was the Messiah that they were hoping for, that would march in there and probably drive these rotten, wicked Romans out and turn the world upside down. But no, they missed the point of this. This Bible is not great. The only good thing is it will fit in the suitcase well. Anyway, It is the printed word of God. I'll manage. Let's go to Revelation chapter 5. There is a point that I want to make with the Lord coming to the earth as a servant king, and he did something that no king would ever do. I mean, let's face it, if the Lord was playing chess, he would have lost. Because, you know, the king, you're meant to protect the king at all costs. You lose the king, that's the game. And this is the point that I'm making in verse 6. And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the four beasts, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb, as it had been slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, sent forth into all the earth, speaking of the redemption power of the Lord, the redeeming power of the Lord, and of the holy seal. 7. Ultimate divinity. And yet he made himself a sacrifice. And we read in verse 9. And they sung a new song, saying, Thou art worthy to take the book, and to open the seals thereof. For thou wast slain, and hast redeemed us to God by thy blood, out of every kindred and tongue and people and nation, and hath made us unto our God kings and priests, and we shall reign on the earth. I don't think I'd be a really good ruler. I don't think I'd be a good protractor either. But I can't imagine what this time will be like when we're called to be rulers and kings and priests to the Lord. And this was the thing, that a king will take power to himself. He'll concentrate power within his family. They'll set up a dynasty. And you know, a great example is Chinese history. If you read Chinese history, you can read all the great dynasties: the Ming, the Qing, the Song, Tang, Qi, the heaps. And they had all their dynasties, but it was all about actually, and that surround themselves with eunuchs, so that the power was all concentrated within the royal family, and that was it. You know, the emperor, to deceive the emperor was to deceive God. To deceive Pharaoh was to deceive God. To deceive Caesar was to deceive the gods. That's all. There's all a pattern here of kingship. But with Jesus, it's different. He didn't take the power because he wanted the power for himself. He wanted to give you and I the power. And what's the power for? The power is for to rise up and walk. The power is to receive your sight. The power is to say to the storm, calm, be still. The power is to say to the dead, rise up. We have power over death. And not just the resurrection power of Jesus Christ, as in the last day, but if we find ourselves in that situation where the death is untimely of a brother or a sister, we can pray. Because it's not just because we see it with our eyes doesn't mean it's the be all end all. I'm leaving out a talk about faith here, and there's a if I was to talk about faith, I'll be here all night and tomorrow night and the night after, because faith is probably the biggest topic in the Bible and probably the most misunderstood topic in the Bible. But by faith, we can do all these things. we have the power. We have to see that we have the power. Why? Because Jesus has given us the power. We have the power already. Otherwise, the scripture where Jesus says, you shall do greater things, would be made of none effect. And that's one problem with modern science, modern medicine, my stupid analytical brain. It makes faith of none effect. It's quite easy for me to sit down, rationale, think my way out of things. That's the power of this natural flesh. And that's the power of the flesh is what we have to keep under. It's very important to keep our flesh under. If we let our flesh rise and take power in our own life, if we dethrone Jesus from being the king in our life, and we let our flesh be the king in our life, then we're going to be like every other kingdom in this world. And that's not good. There's warrings, arguments, we have strife with our neighbours. We are out of sorts with our brothers and sisters. It just ends up in a horrible heap. And that's the warring. That's the spiritual warring that we often talk about, that we hear about. We hear a lot of things about, to be prepared as a soldier, to go into battle, etc., etc., etc. And we can think about it, that's just war talk, or that's just warmongering, or blah, 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 blah. Well, yes, you may think that. But the reason is that there is a war inside yourself if you let it. If you let the flesh have power, then, because you can only serve one king. And I don't have time to go through the scriptures, but you can look in the scriptures yourself. I think it's Matthew 19 or something, 5 verse 19, or something like that. I know there's a 19 in there somewhere. About you cannot serve God and mammon. You can serve one or the other. You'll hold one and take the other. And that's going a bit off topic. But that's the warfare. But that warfare isn't Christ, ironically. That warfare is keeping the flesh under. If we turn to Revelation chapter 1, but we overcome all things through the power of Christ. And that's what I want us to see, is that we have the power. Jesus' words hold weight. Verse 5. And from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, the first begotten of the dead, the prince of the kings of the earth, unto him that loved us and washed us from our own sins in his own blood. Again, think about it. What king on this earth would die for commoners? No, it's the other way around, isn't it? That's the way that it works in this world, is that the aristocracy survives and they send the peasants and all that off to war. And it's always been that way, all the way up until the First World War, Second World War even. With those ruling officers and things like that. And again, that's Australian armed forces aren't like that, but the British armed forces were like that, particularly up until World War One. I don't know about World War Two, probably still lingering on there. But that's not what we are. We're completely different. Jesus has gone forth and fought the battles for us. You're completely different. Throwing this whole idea of kingship and kingdom and a ruler completely on its head, to how a king should actually be, and an example for all of us, to serve one another. If we turn to 1 Peter chapter 2, we have that same right to the same power because Christ has given it to us. And I guess if there's one thing I want us to take away from all the thoughts tonight, That is to see that you've got that power. You have that power to banish your demons. That you have whatever you're warring against in this life. You have that power. But you have to see you have that power. You can't just say, "I have the power." You got to believe it. You got to feel it. It's no good just saying, "Oh yeah, I've got Christ in my life." You got to believe it, because faith comes through belief, and it's a action. It's a verb. It's not how people say "I hope." Hope is an auxiliary verb. It's a helper verb. The hope doesn't mean anything. But to believe is a verb. And we believe from the heart. And believing is seeing. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9. And we read here. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. We are kings and priests. We fulfill both the Levitical line and we fill the Judean line. We fill the role of coming before the Lord, and as a high priest would, but we also fulfill the role of the kingship as well. And so the Lord calls us a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, peculiar. Okay, well, some of us are very peculiar, like me. But peculiar here means special, well, as in like, as doesn't make it any better, does it? as in like extremely precious, and we're precious to the Lord. And we got to remember that, so that we have the power. You and I have the power to overcome all things in our life. But even up to the point, we say to death, be gone, come forth. We have that power. The storms outside, we can, if we believe from the heart, we can go to the storms. We can say, stop. I wish I thought of that last night when it was howling. But so that was just a blessing that I had. And I'll hand back to Pastor Rob.